Emma always believed marriage was supposed to feel like coming home. Not the kind of home built from bricks and expensive furniture, but the kind made from safety, laughter, and knowing someone chose you completely. When she married Daniel, she thought she had found exactly that. He was kind in all the ordinary ways that mattered most, bringing her coffee before she asked, remembering tiny details from conversations, texting her during work breaks just to ask if she'd eaten lunch. Life with Daniel felt easy. And when their daughter Lily was born, Emma thought their little family was finally complete. Lily was 6 now, all wild curls, scraped knees, and endless curiosity. She had Daniel's dimples when she smiled, though somehow his mother seemed permanently blind to that fact. Emma could never quite explain Margaret to people who hadn't met her. On paper, she looked harmless. Elegant, well-spoken, generous even. She hosted flawless dinner parties, sent expensive birthday gifts, and always remembered everyone's anniversaries. To outsiders, Margaret was the definition of the perfect mother-in-law. But Emma had learned very quickly that perfection could be its own kind of weapon. Margaret never insulted directly, that would have been too obvious. Instead, she specialized in carefully polished remarks, sharp enough to cut but smooth enough to deny. First time Emma met her, Margaret had smiled over a glass of white wine and said, "Daniel has always had such ambitious taste." At first, Emma thought it was a compliment. Later, she understood. Everything Margaret said carried a hidden meaning, folded neatly beneath polite words like a knife tucked inside silk. At their wedding, Margaret wore cream, not white technically, just close enough. When Emma mentioned it jokingly, Margaret placed a hand dramatically over her chest. Oh goodness, I would never compete with the bride. The fact that she absolutely had was left hanging between them. Daniel rarely noticed these things. Or maybe he noticed and chose peace over conflict. "That's just Mom," he'd say with an apologetic smile. Emma hated that phrase. It excused too much. Still, she tolerated Margaret for Daniel's sake. For years, she smiled through tense holidays, endured invasive questions, and accepted that Margaret simply didn't approve of her. But things changed after Lily was born. Margaret's disapproval sharpened into something more focused, something unsettling. "She's adorable," Margaret said the first time she held baby Lily. Then, after a pause, "Interesting. She doesn't really resemble Daniel much, does she?" Emma laughed awkwardly, assuming it was harmless. Babies changed constantly, but the comments didn't stop. As Lily grew, so did Margaret's observations. "Those curls definitely aren't from our side. Daniel's baby pictures looked nothing like this. Such dark eyes, curious, always casual." Always calculated, never enough to openly accuse, just enough to plant seeds. At first, Emma tried logic. "Actually, Lily has Daniel's smile." Margaret would nod thoughtfully, as if humoring a child, "if you say so." It drove Emma insane. Not because the comments made her doubt herself, she had never once betrayed Daniel, but because Margaret seemed almost committed to manufacturing suspicion. Like she was collecting invisible evidence, Daniel dismissed it every time. "She's old-fashioned. She doesn't mean anything by it. You know how Mom is." Yes, Emma thought bitterly. That was exactly the problem. She knew exactly how Margaret was, and recently, Margaret's behavior had become stranger. She started volunteering to babysit more often, something she'd never shown much enthusiasm for before. "I'd love more quality time with my granddaughter," she announced one Sunday. It sounded sweet, normal, but something about it felt off. One afternoon, Emma came home early from errands and found Margaret brushing Lily's hair at the kitchen table. Not unusual, except Margaret seemed startled by Emma's arrival. "Oh," she said too quickly, "you're home." Emma noticed a small plastic bag on the counter. Margaret smoothly moved her purse over it. Probably nothing. Still, a chill ran down Emma's spine. Later that week, Margaret insisted on cleaning up after dinner at their house. She hovered near Lily, collecting her half-finished juice glass almost immediately after she set it down. Emma watched silently. A strange unease settled in her stomach. Tiny moments, individually meaningless. Together, unsettling. That night, while Lily slept and Daniel scrolled through emails beside her, Emma finally spoke. "Has your mom been acting weird lately?" Daniel glanced up. Weird how? Emma hesitated, trying not to sound paranoid. "She's extra interested in Lily." Daniel chuckled softly. "That's called being a grandmother." "No," Emma said. "I mean weirdly interested." He set his phone down. "You're overthinking." Maybe she was. God, she hoped she was. But instinct was a stubborn thing, and hers was screaming. Over the next few days, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Margaret called more often, asked oddly specific questions. Had Lily lost any teeth yet? Did she still use the same toothbrush brand? Would Emma mind if Margaret took Lily shopping next weekend? It all sounded innocent enough, but innocence had never been Margaret's strongest quality. Then, on Friday evening, Margaret called. Her tone was unusually formal. "Emma, I'd like you and Daniel to come by tomorrow night." Emma frowned. "For dinner?" "No," Margaret replied, "for a family discussion." The words landed heavily. What kind of discussion? A pause. Then Margaret said almost too calmly, "An important one." The call ended. Emma lowered the phone slowly. A knot tightened in her chest. Across the room, Lily sat on the carpet, coloring princesses in glitter crayons, humming softly to herself. Completely unaware, completely safe, at least for now, Daniel walked in carrying groceries. Who was that? Emma looked up at him, unease crawling higher in her throat. "Your mother," he sighed immediately. "What does she want now?" Emma stared at the dark screen of her phone. Something deep inside her whispered a warning she could no longer ignore. "I don't know," she said quietly. "But I think we're about to find out." Emma barely slept that night. She lay awake beside Daniel, staring at the ceiling while shadows stretched across their bedroom walls. Every time she closed her eyes, Margaret's voice replayed in her mind. A family discussion, an important one. Margaret was dramatic by nature, but this felt different. There had been a strange confidence in her tone, like someone preparing for a performance they had rehearsed many times. Beside Emma, Daniel slept peacefully, one arm thrown across his pillow, completely unaware of the storm brewing. Emma envied him. By morning, her anxiety had hardened into irritation. She hated this feeling, the sense that Margaret somehow had the power to disturb their home without even stepping inside it. At breakfast, Lily chatted happily about school art projects while Emma forced herself to smile. "Can I show Grandma my drawing later?" Lily asked, holding up a paper covered in crooked flowers and a giant yellow sun. Emma hesitated for half a second. "Maybe another day, sweetheart." Lily pouted, "But Grandma likes my drawings." Emma nearly laughed at the irony. Margaret liked very few things without agenda. Daniel glanced at her over his coffee mug. "You're still worried about tonight?" Emma set down her fork. "Yes," he gave her a reassuring look. "It's probably nothing." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Your mother has never called a mysterious family meeting for nothing." Daniel sighed, knowing she was right. By evening, the dread sitting in Emma's chest felt almost physical. Margaret's house looked exactly as it always did, impossibly neat, warmly lit, and emotionally freezing. Fresh lilies sat in the hallway vase. Everything smelled faintly of vanilla candles and furniture polish. The perfect home curated by a woman obsessed with appearances. Margaret greeted them at the door wearing a pale blue sweater and an expression so composed it instantly made Emma uneasy. "Come in," she said. "No hug, no pleasantries, not even a comment about traffic. Just business." That alone was enough to confirm Emma's fears. In the dining room, a single folder rested in the center of the polished oak table. Emma stopped walking. Her stomach dropped. "What is that?" she asked. Margaret folded her hands neatly in front of her. "Please sit." Daniel frowned. "Mom, what's going on?" Margaret waited until they were seated before lowering herself into the chair opposite them, like a judge preparing sentencing. Emma felt suddenly cold. Margaret exhaled dramatically. "What I'm about to share may be uncomfortable," she began. Emma nearly rolled her eyes, always theatrical, but then Margaret slid the folder toward them, and everything changed. I took the liberty of having a DNA test performed. Silence. Emma stared at her. Surely she'd misheard. A what? Margaret remained infuriatingly calm. A DNA test. Daniel blinked rapidly. On who? Margaret looked directly at Emma. Lily. For one horrifying second, Emma genuinely stopped breathing. The room blurred. You did what? Her voice cracked across the dining room walls. Margaret didn't flinch. I felt it was necessary. Emma shot to her feet so fast her chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor. Necessary, she repeated, disbelief spilling into anger. You secretly DNA tested my daughter. Margaret's expression remained composed, almost self-righteous. I had reason to believe Daniel deserved certainty. The insult hit harder than a slap, not because Emma feared the results. Because this woman had violated her child, used her daughter like evidence in some twisted investigation. Daniel looked horrified. Mom, tell me you're joking. Margaret turned toward him with almost maternal sympathy. I know this is difficult, sweetheart, but I did this to protect you. Emma laughed once, a sharp, humorless sound. Protect him? From what exactly? Margaret's eyes narrowed just slightly. From raising another man's child. The words landed like shattered glass. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed. Emma felt humiliation, rage, and disgust collide so violently inside her she thought she might scream. Instead, her voice came out terrifyingly quiet. You think I cheated on your son. Margaret lifted one shoulder. I believe facts matter more than feelings. Daniel grabbed the folder before Emma could throw it across the room. His hands shook as he opened it. Margaret leaned back slightly, watching with barely concealed anticipation. Emma saw it then. Not concern, not maternal protection. Satisfaction. Margaret had been waiting for this moment. Waiting to watch Emma's life explode. Daniel scanned the first page. Then the second. His expression changed. Confusion, then disbelief, then something else. He laughed. Actually laughed. Margaret frowned immediately. What? Daniel turned the paper around and tapped a highlighted section. Because Lily is my daughter. Margaret stared. The color slowly drained from her face. Emma leaned over and read the report herself. Probability of paternity, 99. 9,009, 199%. There it was, scientific confirmation of what Emma had known all along. She should have felt vindicated. Instead, she mostly felt violated and furious. Well, Emma said coldly, folding her arms, congratulations. You tested a child behind her parents' backs to prove absolutely nothing. Margaret snatched the report back, scanning it rapidly as if reality itself had betrayed her. No, she muttered. That can't. Then she froze completely. Emma noticed it instantly. Margaret's entire body went still. Daniel noticed too. What? He asked. Margaret didn't answer. Her fingers tightened around the papers. Daniel reached across the table and pulled the report toward himself again. What are you looking at? He flipped to the final page. His brow furrowed. There's another match listed. Emma leaned closer. Under extended DNA connections, a name appeared. Potential close family match, Michael Carter. Shared DNA suggested a half-sibling relationship. Daniel stared. What the hell? He looked up slowly at his mother. Mom, who is Michael Carter? Margaret looked like someone had just pulled the floor out from beneath her. Gone was the smug composure. Gone was the certainty. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. And for the first time since Emma had known her, Margaret looked afraid. Truly afraid, not embarrassed, not inconvenienced, exposed. Daniel's voice sharpened. Answer me. Margaret swallowed hard. Her eyes darted toward the report like it had betrayed her personally. Emma sat back in stunned silence, realizing something extraordinary. Margaret hadn't just failed to destroy Emma tonight. She had accidentally detonated something far bigger. And judging by the panic flooding Margaret's face, whatever secret had just surfaced was one she had spent a lifetime trying to bury. The silence in the dining room became unbearable. Not the ordinary kind of silence filled with awkwardness or discomfort. This one was heavier, dangerous. Like the entire room had suddenly become too small to hold what was about to happen. Daniel stared at the report, then back at his mother. "Who is Michael Carter?" he repeated, slower this time. Margaret still said nothing. Her carefully controlled expression had collapsed completely. The polished woman who always had the right words, the right posture, the right response for every situation, now looked like a stranger wearing her face. Emma watched in disbelief. For years, Margaret had acted untouchable, unshakable, and now all it took was a few pages of DNA results for her entire foundation to crack. Daniel pushed the paper across the table. "Mom." His voice was firmer now, sharper. "Talk." Margaret inhaled slowly, but even that seemed shaky. "It's complicated." Emma almost laughed. Of course it was. Margaret had just publicly accused her of infidelity, secretly tested a child, and somehow still wanted the luxury of nuance. Daniel leaned back in his chair, jaw tight. "No," he said coldly, "you don't get to say complicated." Margaret looked wounded by his tone. An emotion Emma found almost offensive. "Not after tonight, not after all of this. You humiliated my wife," Daniel continued. "You violated our daughter's privacy, and now I'm finding out I apparently have a half-sibling." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. That tiny fracture hurt more than any yelling could have. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. For a brief moment, Emma almost felt sympathy. Almost, then Margaret spoke. "Before I married your father," she said quietly, "I got pregnant." Daniel blinked. The words hung in the air like smoke. Emma felt her own breath catch. This was not where she had expected the night to go. Margaret folded her trembling hands together. "I was 21, still in university." Her voice sounded smaller now, less polished, more human, and somehow that made everything worse. Because this wasn't some random scandal. This was a life she had hidden, a person, a boy. Margaret continued, "I had a son." Daniel stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "You had a child," Margaret nodded once. "My parents were very strict, very concerned about appearances." The irony was almost unbearable. Emma had to physically stop herself from reacting. Of course, Margaret came from people obsessed with appearances. The family resemblance was suddenly crystal clear. "They forced me to keep the pregnancy quiet," Margaret said. "After he was born, they arranged an adoption." Daniel's face hardened. "You gave him away." Tears slid down Margaret's cheeks. "I didn't feel like I had a choice." The room fell quiet again, this time not with tension, with shock. Emma folded her arms tightly. She understood enough about life to know that young women, especially decades ago, often had impossible decisions made for them. That part wasn't the issue. The issue was everything that came after. Daniel seemed to reach the same conclusion. "You never told Dad." Margaret shook her head. "No." "You never told me." "No." Daniel laughed bitterly. "Interesting." Margaret flinched. The sound was not kind, not amused. It was the sound of someone watching a version of reality crumble in real time. "You spent my entire life lecturing me about honesty," Daniel said. Each word came out flatter, colder. "You judged everyone." Margaret opened her mouth. Daniel, a no. He cut her off, a rare thing. Emma had almost never seen him interrupt his mother before. "You don't get to interrupt now." Margaret closed her mouth. For once she listened. Daniel tapped the DNA report. "You secretly tested my daughter because you believed Emma was hiding something from me." His eyes locked onto hers. "While you were hiding an entire son." There it was. The hypocrisy laid bare so perfectly it barely required commentary. Emma finally spoke. "You spent years questioning my integrity." Margaret turned toward her, eyes red and exhausted. Emma held her gaze, every comment, every little suggestion, every accusation disguised as concern. Margaret looked down. No denial, no clever defense, just silence, which somehow felt more satisfying than any apology. I thought I was protecting my family, Margaret whispered. Emma let out a quiet breath. No, she replied. You were controlling your family. Margaret's face tightened. Because that was the truth neither of them could avoid. This had never been about Daniel, or Lily, or family protection. This was about control. Margaret had built her entire identity around being morally superior, organized, correct, and above reproach. And Emma threatened that image, young, loved, trusted by Daniel, accepted into the family in ways Margaret couldn't fully manage. So Margaret searched for cracks, and when she couldn't find any, she manufactured suspicion instead, until her own scheme exposed the very secret she feared most. Daniel stood abruptly. The chair legs scraped sharply across the floor. I need air. Margaret looked panicked. Daniel, please. But he was already walking away. The back door slammed moments later. Emma remained seated. For the first time in years, Margaret looked smaller than her, not physically. Emotionally, the power dynamic had shifted so dramatically it was almost surreal. Margaret wiped her eyes. I never wanted this. Emma stared at her. That sentence was almost funny, because technically, Margaret had created every single part of this disaster herself. Well, Emma said quietly, standing and collecting her purse, you should have thought about that before you ordered a DNA test. Margaret looked up at her. Broken not from cruelty, not from revenge, but from truth. Sometimes truth did what no enemy ever could. Destroyed the version of yourself you spent decades protecting. Emma walked toward the back door to find Daniel. Behind her, Margaret remained seated at the dining table, alone, surrounded by her spotless house, fresh flowers, expensive candles, and the ruins of her own carefully curated life. And for once, there was no one left to blame but herself. Daniel stood outside on the back patio, both hands gripping the wooden railing so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of freshly cut grass and rain somewhere in the distance. Beyond the fence, neighborhood lights glowed softly, peaceful and ordinary, as if the world hadn't just shifted beneath their feet. Emma stepped outside and quietly closed the door behind her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Daniel stared into the darkness. Emma watched him carefully. This wasn't just anger. This was grief, the quiet, ugly kind that comes when someone you trusted suddenly becomes unfamiliar. She lied to me my whole life, Daniel finally said. His voice was low and uneven. Emma moved beside him, leaning lightly against the railing. She lied to everyone. Daniel let out a bitter laugh. Somehow that doesn't make me feel better. Fair. Nothing about tonight was designed for comfort. Emma reached for his hand, and after a second, he let her hold it. Inside the house, they could faintly hear movement. Margaret likely pacing, crying, or trying to mentally reorganize a life that had just exploded in spectacular fashion. Emma would have felt sorry for her if Margaret hadn't brought a secret DNA test to dinner like a villain in a daytime drama. Life had a strange sense of irony. Daniel rubbed a hand over his face. I keep replaying everything. What do you mean? He exhaled heavily. All those years she acted like honesty was everything. Every lecture, every judgment. His jaw tightened. She made me feel guilty for the smallest mistakes growing up. Emma frowned. That tracked. Margaret didn't seem like the type to tolerate imperfection in anyone but herself. Daniel shook his head, and meanwhile, she was hiding something this huge. Emma squeezed his hand. You're allowed to be angry. He looked at her then, guilt flashing across his face. I'm sorry. Emma blinked. For what? For not listening to you. There it was, the sentence Emma had waited years to hear, not because she wanted to be proven right, but because she had spent too long feeling like her discomfort around Margaret was somehow irrational. Daniel gave a humorless smile. You kept telling me something was off. Emma softened slightly. Yes, though I didn't exactly predict secret DNA testing and surprise hidden sibling revelations. That made him laugh. A real laugh this time. Brief, tired, but real. Progress. They stayed outside another few minutes until Daniel straightened, shoulders settling with sudden clarity. I can't do this anymore. Emma tilted her head. Do what? He glanced toward the house. Pretend my mother's behavior is normal. That sentence alone felt revolutionary. For years, Daniel had minimized Margaret's actions with automatic loyalty. That's just Mom, not tonight. Tonight, reality had punched straight through denial. Daniel opened the back door. Margaret was still seated at the dining table, exactly where Emma had left her. Her mascara had smudged slightly. Her posture, once always rigid with authority, now sagged under exhaustion. She looked up hopefully when Daniel entered. That hope didn't last long. Daniel remained standing. We need space. Margaret's face fell instantly. Daniel, please, no. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was calm in a way that sounded final. You crossed every possible boundary. Margaret's lips trembled. I was trying to protect you. Daniel gave a slow shake of his head. That excuse doesn't work anymore. Emma almost admired the simplicity of it. No shouting, no dramatic speech. Just truth delivered cleanly. Margaret's eyes shifted toward Emma. There was something unfamiliar in her expression now. Not superiority, not suspicion, humility. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. Emma crossed her arms. Yes, you do. Margaret swallowed. I was wrong about you. A very understated summary, Emma thought. But technically accurate. Margaret looked genuinely uncomfortable saying the words, which made them feel at least somewhat sincere. I let my fears cloud my judgment. Emma held her gaze. No. You let your need for control cloud your judgment. Margaret winced. Direct hit for once. She didn't argue. Didn't twist language. Didn't reposition herself as misunderstood. Just accepted it. That alone was perhaps the clearest sign tonight had changed something. Daniel stepped closer to Emma. We won't be visiting for a while, he said. Margaret nodded weakly. Tears filled her eyes again, but she didn't protest. Maybe because even she knew she had run out of moral leverage. As Emma and Daniel walked toward the front door, Margaret called out softly. What about Lily? Daniel paused. Without turning around, he answered, When we're ready. It was both a boundary and a mercy. More kindness than Margaret had earned. Outside, Emma inhaled deeply. The night felt different now. Lighter, not because the situation was good. It was objectively a mess, but because something oppressive had finally cracked open. The tension Margaret had cultivated for years was gone. Exposed, neutralized, Daniel opened the car door for her. As they drove home, city lights blurred past the windows. After a while, Emma smiled faintly. Daniel noticed. What? She looked at him. Your mother spent years trying to prove I had some hidden secret. He groaned softly. Don't remind me. Emma leaned back in her seat, and in the end, she exposed her own. Daniel let out a reluctant laugh. When you say it like that, it sounds ridiculous. It is ridiculous. They drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence. At home, they found Lily asleep on the couch under a blanket, one hand still clutching her glitter crayon drawing. Daniel gently carried her upstairs. Emma followed behind, watching him tuck their daughter into bed with careful tenderness. This was what mattered, not Margaret's suspicion, not her secrets, not her collapse, just this, their family. Safe, whole, real. As Emma turned off Lily's bedroom light, one thought settled warmly in her chest. Margaret had wanted revenge for an imagined betrayal. Instead, truth had handled everything without Emma lifting a finger. And sometimes, that was the sweetest revenge of all.